Hello and welcome. This is Microsoft Flight Simulator and this is the Phoenix Airbus A320. Today we'll be covering a topic that one of you has asked in the comments section. The question was, how do you correctly shut down an aircraft? So once you've finished for the day and you're at the gate, what steps do you have to take to actually correctly shut down the aircraft? We'll be looking at that today. There's actually quite a lot you have to consider, probably not a big surprise. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, we are just arriving at the gate. We've just landed here at beautiful Zurich Airport. It's a cold winter's day, but luckily this is the end of our shift. We're just parking the aircraft here and then we're going home. Now we just looked at the system to see what the aircraft is doing next, and we've just seen that the aircraft is going to stay here for 2 hours before the next crew will come. That means we definitely have to shut down the aircraft and power it off, because it cannot sit here without the crew on board with the APU running. So what do? We arrived at the gate. Before we can shut down the engines, two things you need to consider. First of all, is the APU running? It is, because that would be rather embarrassing if we switch off the engines and then we sit in the dark. We can switch on the APU bleed now because we're at the gate. Second thing, has the engine cooldown time elapsed? We've discussed this in other videos already, so from the moment you stow the reversers, you need to have 3 minutes elapsed before you can shut down the engine. So make sure that has happened. And when those two things are good, we can shut down the engines. The aircraft will automatically switch to the APU power. You don't need to do anything, and everything will remain online. The next thing that will happen is that the ground staff, or the ramp agent specifically, will plug into the aircraft, will say welcome to Zurich, and then they will confirm that all chocks are in place. And what that means is we can release the parking brake. Why do we do this? Well, after the landing, as you can probably imagine, we have fairly hot brakes. And you know, as a courtesy to the next crew, we can look at this here, see they're all 110 degrees. As a courtesy to the next crew, you don't want to leave them with an aircraft with hot brakes. We release the parking brakes. We do not switch on the brake fan at the gate. We've discussed this already. The brake fan is first of all very noisy. Secondly, it blows air across the brake pads, which will then blow into the air particles, brake dust, and that is cancerous, and we have now people around the aircraft, so no brake fan at the gate. That's very inconsiderate. So instead we just release the parking brake, and that will help with the brakes cooling down a little bit quicker, especially today when it's a nice and cool day. Next, we give the command to the cabin crew to disarm the slides. This is company dependent. In my company, the command is cabin crew, all doors in park. And then we check here on the door page that this has been done. Once all these things have been completed, we switch off the transponder. I mean, these things can happen at the same time. We no longer want to be visible. And now we can finally switch off the beacon lights, giving the signal to the ground staff that they can now approach the aircraft. This has mainly to do with the slides. I know the Airbus will automatically disarm the slides if somebody opens the doors from the outside, but still, it's a procedure. Once everything is secured, the aircraft either is with the parking brake set or on chock and the slides are disarmed, then we allow the ground staff to approach the aircraft. Then we do a few more steps. Again, this is company specific. In my company, we switch off the fuel pumps. There is a reason behind that, and there's also a reason why sometimes we do not switch off the fuel pumps. That's a whole other video. Then we come down here. If the ground power is connected, we switch over to the ground power. We could now switch off the APU. At many airports this is mandatory for noise regulation, but be aware it is a very cold day. People are still on board, leaving the aircraft. In those moments, also when it's very hot, we let the APU run a little bit longer to keep the cabin air conditioned, or in this case warmed up, and once the last passenger has left, we switch off the APU bleed followed by the APU. And once all of this has been done, we read the parking checklist. Parking brake or chocks, set. Engines, we check here, off. Fuel pumps, up here, off. Yellow alec pump is off. This has to do with single engine taxi. Again, we discussed this in another video. And with that, the parking checklist is complete. And now we are essentially at the gate. And from here on, you have two options. You either turn around the aircraft, or in our case, we shut it down. So let's just say the last passenger has now left the cabin. We are going home. So what can we do, or what should we do before we shut down the aircraft? But first of all, there are two things. I'm not sure if that's actually simulated in the Phoenix, because this would be a bit of a pain for you in the sim. So if we go to the fuel page, yeah, it's not simulated, but that's good, because I wouldn't know how you would deal with this in the sim. I will tell you anyway, because maybe you're interested. There are two pumps here between those two tanks, both left and right. When the Airbus lands, it automatically shuts down these two tanks, and it keeps them shut until you shut down the engines. Now the problem with that is, if we would now power down the aircraft, those two fuel valves would be shut. And if then the next crew would go into the crew room and order the fuel via the system, the fueler would show up, would plug in his truck and pump fuel in. All the fuel would go into the wing tanks, but none of them would go into the outer tanks here. And that would be bad. So that could lead to a situation where these tanks are empty and these are full, and you cannot take off like this, and then you have to pump fuel around, and that takes quite a long time. So we always come to this page, make sure these valves are actually open, which in this case they are, otherwise you would have amber symbols here. If they are closed, you actually have to leave the aircraft. Let me show you. So what you have to do is you come outside and you need to go to the fuel panel here, and you open it up, and by doing so the Airbus thinks it is going to be refueled, and it will open all the valves. That's all you have to do. You open it, wait 2 seconds, close it, and that's it. Now this may seem annoying that one of us has to come outside and do this, but actually at my company, after each landing we should do a very quick walk around anyway. This is not like a proper walk around like we do before each flight. It's just that we want to check that the aircraft is in a good state for the next crew. It has happened to me that we had a perfectly normal approach. Everything seemed normal. I had a quick walk around and I noticed a dead bird stuck here in the gear. And then of course maintenance has to come, they have to do some checks, paperwork needs to be done, and it would be very unfortunate if you just leave the aircraft, the next crew comes and on their walk around they find a bird, because that means their flight is definitely going to be delayed. So again, as a courtesy to the next crew, we do a quick walk around, nothing fancy, we just make sure that there are no dead birds or anything obvious like any leaks or something. And whilst doing so, we just open and close this panel here. The next thing we need to look at is what we call the maintenance bus. So what is the maintenance bus? Okay, I told you the aircraft is on the ground for 2 hours. During that time, at some point in time, there will be cleaning staff coming on board and catering. The cleaning staff will come with vacuum cleaners, and there are obviously plugs on board that they can use. But if we shut down the aircraft, there will be no power available and they cannot vacuum the cabin. And this, of course, is not good. So the Airbus A320 has what we call the maintenance bus. And what that means is, if the external power is connected, even though the entire aircraft is shut down, the plugs in the the sockets in the cabin will still receive some power. So where is the maintenance bus? It's actually up here Let's walk there. Okay, so you walk into the cabin, just, the forward part of the cabin, and you look up and you see this panel here. And here it says maintenance bus. And you essentially move this to on. And that's it. So if you ever leave an aircraft and whilst deboarding you notice one of the pilots coming out of the cockpit and doing this, you know now what that means. It essentially means this crew is going home or shutting down the aircraft. Maybe they have an aircraft change, always possible, and they are essentially getting the aircraft ready for the cleaning stuff, making sure they can use the power whilst the aircraft is powered down. Okay, finally, we want to switch off the APU. So we go to the APU page, and this is very important. It says here, flap open. What that means is the flap, which essentially lets the air into the engine, is open. And this needs power to close. So we cannot power off the aircraft until the APU has fully shut down. Very important. So we would now switch off the APU bleed, switch off the APU, the aircraft automatically switches to ground power, but we can't just switch off the aircraft now. No, we have to wait until the APU has fully run down and the flap open message has disappeared, meaning that the inlet flap is closed, and then and only then can we finally switch off the aircraft. Whilst we're waiting, there's there's some things that are company specific. In my company, I don't know why we always do this. Put the switches in these positions, and this is the standard how we leave it for the next crew. This is actually nowhere written down, but for some reason everybody does it. It's one of those company culture things, I suppose. We also have to do some paperwork. Well, I say paperwork, it's all done on the EFB these days, where we close the flight. If there are any technical defects we noted, we would send them off now. We close the flight plan here so that the company gets all the times and fuel data, etc. So this is all done on here. And then finally we are ready to shut down the aircraft. Whilst we're waiting for the APU to run down, we can come up here and do the first memory items, well, steps that we should know. So first we switch off these bad boys here because we no longer need any navigation, and you don't want them running whilst the aircraft is switched off. We switch off the oxygen supply, and then we switch off all lights, all the signs and the emergency lights. Now, very important, the emergency lights cannot be switched off as long as there are any passengers on board, because they're needed in case of evacuation. But once the cabin crew has confirmed all passengers are out, we can switch them off. And with that, we are in a good configuration to finally shut down the aircraft. All we have to do now is wait for the APU to run down and the flap to close. Okay, the APU has shut down. As you can see, the flap open message has disappeared, and now finally the aircraft is in a state where we can shut it down. And for that, we read the securing the aircraft checklist. Securing the aircraft checklist: ADS off, oxygen off, emergency exit lights off, batteries off. And now the final act of the day: switch off the power. The aircraft is now in a secure state. Everything has been done correctly. We now take our EFBs, make sure that all the pens that we usually get from the hotel rooms are not left behind. Very important, sunglasses, they usually lie around somewhere here. We need to take those as well. And then we can leave the cockpit and make our way to the hotel or back home. And that is how we shut down an aircraft. As you can see, there's a few more steps than some people might think, but it's not, super complicated. Just a few things to consider. So I hope this answered your question. And who knows, maybe next time you fly the A320, you arrive at the gate, you don't want to do any more flying, you can follow these steps, and then you have a very accurately and realistic way of shutting down your Phoenix A320. And that is already the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you for all your support. And until the next time, all the best. Bye bye.